Hello, Waswere here, back with another video, and today we are talking about the Rex Matriarchs, specifically my opinion and thoughts on them. I had said this on Reddit, but I think it encapsulates exactly my opinion on these bosses. Rex Matriarchs is the type of content this game needs. The gap between God Wars Dungeon 2 and Rax is too far, and this does a great job of closing that gap. This feels very much like God Wars Dungeon 2 on release, which is a group of bosses that aren't too complicated, but on the natural bossing progression. God Wars Dungeon 2 is the first time that the player is heavily incentivized to use defensive abilities to sustain themselves, and or deal with mechanics. The ability to react to an animation, swap to a shield, and activate resonance is an imperative skill in PvM and is going to be useful all the way up to the hardest of hard bosses in the game. I learned how to resonance in a really stressful environment of Virago while learning to base tank at the same time. At that time, I was focusing on doing the mechanics of a 15-minute boss fight correctly that were really complicated for my PvM ability at the time, and because of that, I messed up a lot and died a lot. Had I had the opportunity to learn at a God Wars Dungeon 2 style boss, I think my introduction to high-level PvM would have been a lot smoother and a lot nicer. Rex Matriarchs does this same thing, but they take it a step further. Instead of just focusing on using defensive abilities as a training point, it also punishes the player for an improper rotation. If you Death Swiftness on top of the Eruption against Fenthraken, you're going to struggle to take advantage of the DPS increase. Or if you try to rapid fire as the lightning comes in, you're not going to get the best out of your DPS as you have to move out of the way. On the new boss progression, this boss is the first time where you have to think about how the ability you're going to use will be impacted by the mechanics, and the best way to know if you're going to be impacted by the mechanics is counting auto attacks. Fenthraken is going to launch his lightning effect after 3 auto attacks, so if you've already counted 3, rapid firing is probably a mistake. It's also consistent that the 5th auto attack is a large hitting ranged hit, so once you've counted to 4, you know that the next one will be a ranged hit, so you can freely swap over. Not hitting this range protection is going to make it very hard to sustain your HP unless you're in max gear or near max gear. Moving on to Orichalca, assuming you do the mechanic and don't just legacy Ice Blitz, you are heavily disincentivized from ultimating before the Frostbite, as your global cooldown is going to get doubled. You're going to want to wait until after the Frostbite is cleared to ultimate so you can do as much damage as possible in your Sunshine or Metamorphosis. This game also rewards you for that by giving you 10% Adrenatech for about 10 ticks, further incentivizing you ultimating as you clear the Frostbite. This is another great teaching point where sometimes it's better to delay your ultimate to a point where you can do more damage. This is really key to high-level PvM, as we usually ultimate when we need to do the most damage, and not just right as it comes off cooldown. Rathus doesn't have too many teaching points. I think it's the weakest of the 3 in terms of building that bridge to being able to do a Raxor consistently, but I think it's a good place to practice melee DPS, as beating the Uber heal can be a challenge depending on your gear and unlocked abilities. And killing Rathus is way more fun than just sitting at dummies and seeing if your challenge gem is slightly higher than the last time. Of course, it's unfortunate that the GP per hour isn't that great and the items aren't as expensive as people were anticipating, but it is a mid-tier boss, so we can't expect massive GP per hour, and you're still able to make up to about 10 mil per hour there, I found. There are obviously some problems with Rex Matriarchs. No update is perfect, and Jagex themselves will probably admit it. I have a host of small changes that I just want to rapid fire through, but the first 2 are kind of major, so maybe you would call them major changes. First up is the accuracy issue. I love that weaknesses have come back and it heavily incentivizes using the weakness against them. For example, I was getting faster kills with a Hex Hunter bow than my Blightbounds with Onyx Bicriminal Bolts, and it was a breath of fresh air to do some range PvM with a bow. People have been complaining that bows are useless, and now Jagex has created a place where bows are more useful. That's great, that's variety, that's good in my opinion. But with that in mind, I'd like to increase the affinity of the mobs for both the weak style and the weakness. Increasing the affinity is essentially increasing the accuracy. Going from 20 affinity to 40 affinity would be a doubling of accuracy, assuming everything else stayed the same. The changes I want to make here is increasing the weakness affinity from 75 to 85. This would lead to an approximate 13.3% increase in accuracy when using the weakness. meaning that as long as you have T80 plus weapons, you should not splash with the weakness on Slayer Task. Right now you get about a 93% accuracy with a T80 weapon in the same scenario. At the same time, I'd like to increase the correct style affinity. So for Fenthraken, that would be the ranged affinity by 5, going from 60 to 65. This would be an 8% increase to accuracy. Still better to use the weakness, but not as punishing, especially for players without max gear. The health is another issue. I feel as though 190k is just a little bit too much. For me, in near max or max gear, it flows very well, but if you take a little bit away from my setup, it becomes a bit of a drain to do the final 40 to 50k HP on each of the monsters. It's mostly, I've already dealt with the main mechanic and I'm just using Revo basics and thresholds until it dies. HP being lowered to 150k would still require all of the mechanics being done correctly, just as much, but it would make the fight drone on a little bit less near the end of it. This is especially true with Rathis and Orichalca, where they don't do their main effect again, so you're just kind of hitting it very simply. There are two more really minor things, but they are more annoyances than actual changes. Fenthraken works like Telos, where the travel time of the projectile and the animation get desynced from each other, depending on how far away you are. If you are MD to the boss, you will take magic or range damage before you even see the projectile, but if you are at a max distance, then it will damage as it hits you. This makes it hard and cumbersome to soul split flick, and this is a great environment to learn how to soul split flick, so if they're able to fix that and have it sync up correctly, that would be great for another teaching moment. I absolutely love the frostbite mechanic from Orichalca. They really nailed the feeling of being frozen and being unable to move. The only issue I have with it is that when you are reheated, your global cooldown isn't reset, so you're sometimes left awaiting another 5 ticks before you can do an ability, and it feels even slower, and you've already unfrozen yourself, so why are you still that slow? And then one final change is I would make that the spawn speed is way too slow when you are killing one of the dinos. It was designed somewhat to go in and only kill one, but it's 38 seconds between spawns, and that speed is tuned to killing all 3 in a mass, but if you're only killing one, you're left with almost a minute of downtime between kills, and it can get kind of boring if you're not AFK. There should be an even faster mode so that killing only one dino can have more fun per hour. Overall, these bosses are good, and I'm happy with what Jagex has done. Please let me know what you think about the bosses, as I'm always curious for others' opinion. If you enjoyed the video, consider dropping a like. It really helps out the algorithm and the channel and getting more people to see the thumbnail. And if you like the content I'm creating, consider subscribing. We're approaching the 10,000 subscriber mark, which is something I never thought I would ever reach. If you had told me 7 years ago I had been this successful, I would have been so happy. But I only ever started making videos about 18 months ago, even though I always wanted to. So if you're ever wondering about whether you should take the plunge, if you have some free time, especially with the pandemic still roaring, you can take some of that extra free time and throw it into a YouTube channel. If you put in the effort, if you do it the right way, you can make it, and it's not something where you innately have it or you innately don't. You can learn how to do it. For the first couple months, I didn't even have thumbnails on my video. So if I can make it, you can make it. But past that, have a good day, and I'll catch you in the next one.